Hello, Internet. Welcome back to Jams by Jesh. I'm Jesh, and today we are here to talk about the thrilling world of F-Zero's Mute City. F-Zero is a fast-paced racing game that has been an integral part of gaming history. One key element that has remained constant is its iconic track, Mute City. With F-Zero 99 releasing on the Switch recently, my love for the franchise has been reignited, and I just knew I had to talk about it. What sets this track apart from the others are its renditions across various games in the series and crossovers alike. We'll explore what makes each version of the track unique, and yes, offer some constructive criticism along the way. But remember, our focus is on creativity and aesthetic appeal over faithfulness to the original. We're going to go through every rendition in release order, so rev up your engines, because without further ado, let's get into it. The original F-Zero for the Super Nintendo was bound by some serious hardware limitations. In spite of this, Mute City is a simple and timeless track that evokes a strong sense of nostalgia with its distinct arrangement. The high-tempo melody is just as deep and complex as it is iconic. It borrows notes from other musical modes and keeps listeners intrigued to find out where it's going next. The rhythm of the track is also fascinating. The combined frenzy of the triplet melody, the quarter note percussion, and the 8-note bass make for a propulsive track that makes you want to climb up and get the last chance. F-Zero joke. The track is a masterclass in songwriting. However, if I were to critique anything, I would say that the bass line in the A section can be a little too droning and repetitive, and the transition from the B section back to the A section kind of loses some of the momentum that the track builds up, and for a racing game, that's a problem. But those nitpicks aside, I love this track so much. F-Zero X's Mute City is a fantastic cover of the original, elevating the quality of instrumentation with the change in console. This was the first game to use guitars in the mix, a choice that would establish the aesthetic direction for the rest of the series. The intro is also much more fleshed out harmonically, with an exciting drum riff and some healthy reverb on the guitar. The track maintains the composition of the original, with the same A-B sections, the same melody, the same bass line, and the same percussion, even though the improved drum kit of the N64 makes it much more full. With that said, my critiques of the track are pretty similar to the critiques of the original. The bass line is pretty much identical to the original, and unfortunately, I'm still not a fan even with the change in instrumentation. The same is true of the B to A section transition, which is still somewhat deflating. To reiterate, I like this version a lot, and it is an incredibly faithful adaptation of the original. Now, on to one of my favorite remixes, Super Smash Bros. Melee's Mute City. Like the F-Zero X version, I consider the Melee version to be an evolution. With another change in console, the bass line and percussion of this track are truly elevated to a different plane. This is partially due to an upgrade in instrumentation, but it's also largely thanks to a change in composition. The rhythm of the drums is the same, but the drum part is complex, adding in some sweet cymbal crashes and toms to the mix. I also love the change to the rhythm of the bass. It's slightly slower, but the syncopation adds so much life and groove to the track. The guitar is nearly identical to the F-Zero X version, but I'm okay with that as I love it still. It's a really warm and almost wet tone, but something about it hits my nostalgia just right. In terms of what could be improved, they don't do much to improve the transition from the B to A section still, which is unfortunate. Additionally, the mixing of this track isn't perfect. bass is very toned down and almost hard to make out at times. Nonetheless, one of my favorites easily, and for its time, it was a pioneer in remixing this song. Well, F-Zero Maximum Velocity is unfortunately a step down. It's easy to attribute this to lacking hardware since it came out on the Game Boy Advance early in its life cycle. The bass line and percussion revert compositionally to that of the first two games, which I find pretty disappointing. On top of that, mixing is even weirder in this version. The bass is almost too loud in the intro and then too quiet in the rest of the track. I also don't really like the attempted guitar sound that is used for the melody. I understand the desire to replicate the sound of F-Zero X, but I think it's quite grating in this case. I think it's something about the higher register on the Game Boy Advance. It's just very unpleasant. I'm not going to dwell on this version for too long because I don't have much positive to say. But I think at this point in time, Nintendo is definitely feeling compelled to change things up. Speaking of which, F-Zero GX is a subversion of the Mute City that we've come to recognize and love over the years. The track has a completely unique introduction with a synthy, spacey, and almost metallic aesthetic. I love it. It completely addresses the concern I had of the transition taking away from the track's pacing, and it produces an almost ethereal sound. This is what I imagine a futuristic race would sound like. The main guitar sounds completely different than the other pieces we've heard so far, going for a slightly lower pitched sound. And I love the distortion on the rhythm guitar that we get. It really leans into the grittier feel of GX compared to the first three games. This gritty, distorted rhythm guitar is something that will come back in later arrangements. This time, the drums incorporate a lot more hi-hats, which I feel does a good job to keep the pace. In terms of what I think could be better, as much as I do love the intro, it goes on a little too long. Also, I must say, I missed the B section. I understand foregoing it for some melodic consistency, but I feel like you lose out on so much emotional depth by doing that. Lastly, I'm not too big a fan of the harmonies that they use on the main motif. I don't hate it, but I feel like they're a little distraction. I feel like they're a little distracting. The modal mixture in the melody makes harmonies kind of dissonant, so I respect that the composer managed to do it in a way that wasn't unpleasant at all. All in all, I'm a big fan of this game's rendition, but it's not quite my thing. It's great, it's really creative, but it's not my favorite. F-Zero GP Legend is another Game Boy Advance game in the series that I honestly didn't know existed before making this video. When I listened to it, I went in feeling skeptical, but I actually like this arrangement quite a lot. Again, be mindful of the technical limitations at play here. This is still the Game Boy Advance. If you remember, I found the higher register melody annoying with F-Zero Maximum Velocity. That's why I like the choice this soundtrack did to make the melody in a lower key, making it much more aesthetically pleasing. This also allowed for the rendition to take some interesting liberties with synth harmonies in the upper register. And as I mentioned earlier, if you manage to make harmonies for this melody, I'm pretty impressed. This is actually an idea that later renditions will revisit as well, and I quite like it. As for what could be better, it's the same old things. Mediocre transition, and the bass is the same stationary line, way too hidden in the mix. But kudos to the composers, making the most out of the Game Boy Advance's hardware. Definitely helps that this game was later in the life cycle of the console. Similarly, we should talk about the third Game Boy Advance game, F-Zero Climax, which has one of the most adventurous and experimental remixes of Mute City. There's a lot to really like about this track. For one thing, this is the best sounding Game Boy Advance track that I've ever heard instrumentally. The guitars read clearly as guitars. The distortion sounds authentic, and the drum set sounds full. This piece arguably has the most interesting intro, with a completely unique intro that is meant to reference the anime rendition of Mute City. This intro even has a guitar solo. I've actually never heard that before in anything, but I feel like it works pretty well here. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and it serves as a smooth and energetic transition from the B to the A section when the piece loops. The bass line is the same plain one that we've had before, but I don't mind it here as much because it's mixed in better, and the melody does some jazzy embellishments on the classic Mute City melody. The experimentation that the composers had with this piece is really fascinating. So that's it from me on this one. I really love it, no notes. If I were to nitpick, I'd say that later renditions add some solos that make things very interesting in a way that this piece didn't think to do at the time, because it already pioneered so much. And this is the first one to have a solo. It's just in the intro, which is kind of weird. But again, I love it. No notes. Super Smash Bros. Brawl. My favorite game growing up. Brawl had some really edgy remixes of classic Nintendo pieces that I love, like Zero 2 and Meta Knight's Revenge. And Mute City is no exception. I've really liked how sparse and compressed the intro is. It gives a very Linkin Park flair to the piece that the others thus far haven't really played around with, which is fitting for a fighting game. This is the second rendition of the song to have the melody played on a distortion guitar in a lower key, following the lead of F-Zero GX. The bass line and drums are pretty standard for the track, but I like the piano chords that are mixed in the song. They add a level of harmonic interest to the A section without really clogging things in the mix. I also love the pinch harmonics in the B section. They make for a very fun, dramatic flair in what is otherwise a mostly by-the-book cover of Mute City. Oh yeah, and the solo is incredible. Easily the best guitar solo out of all of these, if you ask me. No contest. It comes at a time when we think the piece is about to loop, and after a brief hum from a choir, it just makes you want to join a mosh pit. And in conjunction with the return of the rhythm distortion guitars, it is truly thrilling. With all that said, this is not my favorite rendition, but it's so good. It's great, don't get me wrong. I actually think it's a little too by the book, and that it lacks some of the character of the others. This is definitely intentional. The others are meant to come off slightly happier, but this one is meant to be serious business. A lot of aspects of Brawl have this characteristic, so it's not just an issue I have with this track, it's a Brawl thing. Other thing I'm not crazy about is the transitions. They're a little better here than usual since they last less time, but it's a massive collapse in energy, and the sparseness of the intro that I complimented before doesn't go over great in the transitions. Nonetheless, I love Brawl, I love this track, and it's a great remix. Now for one of my favorites, if not my favorite. It's one that you might not expect, the Nintendo Land rendition. A lot of you might have never heard of this one before, as Nintendo Land wasn't the biggest game. But the energy in this track is just frenetic. The track does a lot of things right, in my opinion. It takes a lot of influence from EDM, with the first A section being entirely synths. The drums start slightly before the A section, which makes the intro and transitions feel more energetic. There's some really fun synth arpeggios in the higher register, which do a good job of filling the space of the track. And I love what the composer did with the 808's bass line. It's syncopated and bouncy in a way that is actually most reminiscent of the Melee rendition. Then there's this B section. In a major twist, the B section is actually accompanied by an entire string ensemble that is gradually getting louder, really selling us on the epicness and cinematic nature of this track. Then when the track starts up again, from this point on, there's a distortion guitar a la GX and Brawl, joining the synth on the melody. It's such a fun track, and it makes a lot of choices that almost feel tailored to me personally. Only thing that could make it better, in my opinion, is a guitar solo. I feel like they teased us with the distortion guitar, and I want more. Others have done it thus far. Others will do it in the future. It's the only thing that it's missing. All in all, however, amazing track. Nearing the present, we have Mario Kart 8's Mute City. This is another great rendition of the track, close to perfect in my opinion. The best thing about it is the instrumentation. You can tell that they recorded all the music for the game live and on real instruments. There are literally videos of them doing it, in fact. It's a subtle nuance that really adds to the listening experience. I love the saxophone on this track. It's a choice that's in line with the rest of the saxophone-heavy Mario Kart 8 soundtrack, and it sounds wonderful and jolly here. The distortion rhythm guitars return in the A section, and the swelling strings in the B section return. The guitar and saxophone have dueling solos in the second A and B section that are both great. The transitions are smooth and don't feel like too big of a halt thanks to the drums kicking in. If I were to critique anything, I might say I would have liked a little more out of the drums, and the mixing on the low end is a little lacking. These are very minor nitpicks for what is otherwise an incredible remix. Now we have reached our final remix, the most recent one, Smash 4. This is another great remix, and it plays off of a lot of things that the other remixes have done thus far. For one thing, I think this is my favorite guitar tone that they've had in all the remixes. Feels like the perfect combination of Brawl and Melee. Distorted, however, still high pitch. The solo in the second A section is incredible, and it really drives the piece forward. The transitions are fluid and full, the bass line is energetic, and the instrumentation is excellent all around. The only thing I question is the inclusion of the second B section after the solo. I do love the B section, but after such a strong walk down from the solo, it feels a little jarring, and I almost think they could have just gone straight into the transition. Nonetheless, this is an excellent rendition of the tune, and I like it a lot. Well, everyone, that's that. Here are my final rankings summarized on a tier list. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Listening to this song so many times has definitely made me want to give a try at my own version of Mute City. So if this video reaches 50 likes, I'm going to give it a shot. That's all for this video, so like, subscribe for more jams by Jish, and tune in next time. Alright, bye-bye.